Powhatan Confederation. And there's all kinds of proof. There's all proof that they were around the Ohio Valley and that the Powhatan Confederation of 32 tribes extended as far west as the Ohio Valley and even further. And that the westernmost tribes were those Dakotas and other tribes in that vicinity, and they were Dakotas. So when you see people that today, once the United States became states and state lines were drawn and places were separated, then, well, I'm from this state, you're from that state, and so we don't, but that's not true. There was no state line, there was no boundary, and the people mingled. And the Siouan language was the language that was spoken by many of the Powhatan tribes, and also of the tribes in North Carolina. Where we're from would be the same vicinity where probably the center of the Powhatan Confederation would have been located. Somebody might say that that some people, some nations have more power, they're more popular, people talk about them more, people think they're more Indian, you know, and they themselves might think they're more Indian, and this is not true. They're no more Indian than anybody else, no matter where they came from. We're farmers. I'm a farmer. I live in New York. I'm sophisticated, but in my heart, I'm a farmer. And there's no Indian on the plains or someplace else who's riding on a horse or whatever, or who is a warrior. He's no more warrior than I am, and he's not going to be more important and not more Indian than I am.
Betrayed our people.
There's no such thing as a full blood. I think anthropologically and genetically speaking that if we were to go back in this country, on this continent, 4 and 5 generations, 6 generations ago, the people who migrated here, who came here, in many instances were in the process of sacking and plundering and raping and whatever, in the same way that I say that the Vikings did to Europe. And I say that many of those people that did come here did mingle with the people who were here.
Look, the evening is full and happy for us. We will listen to the sound of the brook all through the night and listen to the bells. It's as though they are singing in my heart.
Basically, the story of Pocahontas was created by John Smith. Among the Powhatan people, Pocahontas was not particularly a heroine, and the whole idea of Pocahontas was more myth and legend than anything else. I feel that just being an indigenous person of this continent is very important to me, more so than the specific name. More than anything else, I have to be responsible for trying to maintain my thoughts and my ideas of being indigenous and trying not to fall into the ways of the greater society, and that I should behave in an indigenous fashion, and that when I talk, I should talk that way.
This is not a prayer. I'm just lighting sage to welcome you to my home. This is white sage from California that I'm burning. It's different. I'm in a smoke cloud. This is the white sage. It's from California, and this is from Texas. These are rolled and twisted into a stick called a smudge stick. This is my grandmother's last quilt. She made this. She was making this at the time of her death. It's a flower pattern. I don't know if you can see. There's a bow up here. I'll hold this up. There's a bow up here, and it's huge. It's made for a double made for a double bed. Actually, a queen size bed. It's very large, and it's unfinished. At the time of her death, she was making this, and it's all, you can see the stitches here that are done in light in blue, where there was to be a leaf here, a flower here, and more flowers there. It's not finished. I was raised by my grandmother, my Cherokee grandmother. From the time I was born until I was 17 years old and left home, I was sent every summer to live with my native grandmother. I spent every summer of my life with my native grandmother in Auburn, Alabama. My grandmother had a ritual she would go through every night, and she would strip down to her slip. All women in those days wore slip, a full slip they used to call it, with little thin straps, and you'd always wear a slip with your underwear and your dress. And she would strip to her slip every night, and she would get out these elaborate creams and jars of things, and she would cover her whole face, her entire chest, and her hands and her arms with this cream. And I found out later that what she was doing was bleaching her skin. When she went out in public, she always wore, I never saw her without, her big sun hat, her gloves, and even in August, she was wearing a long sleeve blouse. Working in the garden in the hot sun, she would wear a long sleeve blouse. She did not let the sun affect her skin in any way. She wanted to remain as light-skinned as possible. But I don't blame her for that. I'm sure she has memories of northern Alabama in 1910, when if you weren't a white woman, you weren't anything. These are her parents. These are her parents. Now my grandfather, from this part of his face over, you can even see part of his eye there, this part on over is all painted on, his whole face. The ear is painted on there, the hair is painted. You can see where they clipped off the hair here, and the whole ear is painted on, and this part of his face. And down here you can even see brush strokes. You can see here where the photo has been redone, and the tie was painted on. This collar and the shirt were painted on. The shoulder here was painted. This is all added to the photograph with a paintbrush. And from what I can make out myself, his hair was clipped, and he must have had his hair down like this because they had to repaint that whole half of his face. So they cut off his hair, they gave him an ear. All of this here, these you can see very plainly, and I've looked at this with magnifying glass. This line here is painted on. These are painted on very plainly. These lighter strokes right here are painted on, and this is a paintbrush, and so is that. So they didn't like his hair, I guess, so they gave him a new ear too. He's all redone. She has her whole face has been painted. This is all colored here. This is all painted. This white, all this, it's not white, but whatever, the lighter color here, this is all done with a paintbrush. The part is fake, and this side of her is also, this is painted on. So whatever was here is painted. Of course, this all around her shoulders here is also brushed out, and this has been painted on. So something here for her was painted. This is painted and lopped off. So this much of her has been redone. You can see all over here. So I imagine both of them had hair, some hair hanging down, and something was on this whole half of him here. It's because of my light skin. I never really, people didn't know I was Native unless I spoke up and said something about it. My brother was very, very, very dark-skinned and black hair, and he never said anything about being Native. I think he was ashamed of it. In fact, at one time he even said to his own children that they didn't have enough Indian blood to matter, unquote, from him. My dad was a lieutenant in the Army. See, the things on his shoulders say infantry. When I look at him, I see my eyes. My mother was a nurse in the hospital where I was born, so she knew the doctors, she knew everyone. And when I was born, my father named me Cherokee. And when he left the hospital and went home, my mother got the birth certificate and she tore it up and wrote Claudia Suzanne down where it said name. And there was a big fight about it in our family. And my father, every night when we'd have dinner, he'd look at me and he'd say, "You know what your real name is, don't you?" And I'd say, "Yeah, Daddy, I know my real name." And my whole life he used to say things like, I want you to remember who you are. You know your real name. So that was important to him, even if moms had other ideas. I love my father. I adored my father. He was a wonderful man. If it hadn't have been for my father, I don't think I would have any Native connection at all. But my father was very, very proud of who he was and his family and his blood. And well, like the story I told, he named me Cherokee. It was very important to him that I never forget who I was, he would say to me. When the Trail of Tears was going